How I Got Here, the inside stories of startups and innovation in travel and transportation, with your hosts, PhocusWire's Kevin May and Mozio's David Litwak. Welcome to How I Got Here, stories of innovation in travel and transportation. Today we have Robert Alper from Routehappy on the program. Welcome, Robert.
Hey, how are you?
Pretty good. So we want to talk a little about your history here. So Routehappy was founded in 2010 in Bangkok and has more than 65 customers across the travel industry, including Expedia, Google, Sabre, and United Airlines, to which they provide rich content for over 300 airlines. And I'll let Robert explain exactly what rich content means. But they were also recently acquired by ATP Co., a company I'm sure our listeners probably also would appreciate an explanation of. And what I understand was their first ever acquisition. So congratulations and welcome, Robert. Good to have you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
So we'd like to start off every interview the same way, hence the title of our podcast, and ask you how you got started or how you got here. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, okay. So let's see. I was in travel tech about, 20-ish years ago, starting as the head of airline relations at Site 59. Then Travelocity bought Site 59 and Sabre bought the rest of Travelocity. So I had almost a decade in the industry, and I kept thinking that flight shopping was overly commoditized. It was too much about price and schedule, and that there was no good information that consumers needed when they were shopping for a flight, like how much legroom, how new the plane is, what's included, what isn't included, etc. And as an airline geek, I knew how to find this information, but it required me to stay up till 2, 3 in the morning on Seat Guru and airline websites and Flyer Talk and all these different places to triangulate this data. And I thought, if someone could just consolidate all of this data and content in one place and get it into flight shopping, this problem would be vastly improved for every consumer in the world who shops for flights. And airlines would have the ability to talk about their differentiators. Sales channels would have much better information. And so I kept thinking, someone is going to do something about this problem. The GDSs are going to solve it, or Expedia is going to solve it, or airlines will get together and do something. And they kept not doing it. So I sort of summoned up all the courage that I could muster and quit my job and started Routehappy.
Robert, it's Kev here. Thanks ever so much for joining us on the How I Got Here podcast. I mean, it's interesting. You say you were half expecting somebody to have done it or to do it.
Yeah.
Why do you think they didn't, and you had that kind of free run at it?
It's such an interesting question, Kevin. So when I first started telling people what I was going to do, most of the people said, "Oh, that exists," or "Doesn't that exist already?" And then they'd sort of pause and they'd say, "Oh yeah, you're right, it doesn't exist." There were little pockets of this information, like you could go, just like I said, you could go to Seat Guru and get a little bit, you could go to airline websites and get a little bit, you could go to Flyer Talk and figure it out. I think the reason nobody did it is that it is such a, and I don't want to sound arrogant here, but it is such a complex and sort of arduously painful thing to go do, to take responsibility for articulating what you get or don't get on every flight in the world, like by cabin and by fare. It's really painful. And I don't think any single entity in the industry, like no airline or airline group, or no GDS, no big, OTA, travel seller, sort of, it wasn't an important enough problem for any one of those companies to invest the amount of effort, resources, conviction to solve the problem. So it's an industry-wide problem and I figured the only way this is going to be solved is if an entrepreneur who is sort of, I used to call myself like halfway credible at solving the problem. I said, I'm sort of halfway credible. I think it's a real problem. I obviously talked to a bunch of people, like, should I do this? Am I crazy? Should I go take another job? And I just thought, it's like a crazy, passionate entrepreneur who's sort of going to gamble for who sort of has nothing to lose, and I'll explain something on that in 1 second. It's like a classic entrepreneur problem. Like, just how do you do something that should have existed that nobody else had done? It seemed so obvious to me. And basically what I decided is that from my own personal perspective, if it didn't work, if it was a total flop, then I would have had the experience of a lifetime. And I assumed that I would still be employable after. So I kind of took the risk. Now, people had tried to do little bits and pieces of this in the past, and they had failed. So there had been experiences, and I guess it was one of those moments in an industry where somebody just had to kind of step forward and say, I'm going to do this, and I'm really, really going to do this.
I had a quick follow-up question. I wanted you to go a little more in depth about the content. So on your website, it has amenities and UTAs and UPAs. And I just, it would be great if you explained a little bit more about how you have thought about that content, how you classify it, and how much of it you are literally, are you taking it off of websites, crowdsourcing it, or working with the airlines to get?
Yeah, great question. So the question is, what is airline-rich content? So I'll tell you a little short story as to how we started. Originally, we thought the problem is that there isn't well-structured, detailed content that you can integrate into flight shopping results by flight and cabin and fare. So we set about to go do that, and we thought it's impossible to go amass this kind of information. It's just too broad ourselves by researching it or getting airlines to provide it, et cetera. So we said TripAdvisor for flights. We'll build a flight review system. Kevin, you probably remember this, and David, I don't know if you were around then watching us, but we built this major flight review platform where we asked a ton of questions, and then we parsed out all these little bits and pieces of content and matched them to plane types and flight timings and airlines and cabins, et cetera. And it was a really interesting and hard project to do, but what we found is that there were some absolute gems of content, and then there were some absolute duds. So for example, a wonderful guy became our #1 reviewer, and he may be listening to this, but he was obsessed with coat hooks on planes. And so every single review was about whether the flight had a coat hook in his seat or not. And he would rate the coat hook seats really high, and he would rate the no coat hook seats really low. And we were just looking at this saying, oh my God, we're doomed.
Sorry, Robert.
Yeah.
It's an obvious follow-up, maybe a flippant one. I mean, what airline had the best coat hooks?
Oh gosh, we were so into the existential dilemma of we're screwed if we don't figure this out, because nobody cares enough about coat hooks to build a whole business on it. So I can't even answer that question, and we probably threw away all the data. But it's a good question, Kevin. But we were scratching our heads that entire time saying, oh my God, what are we going to do about this problem? Because clearly user-generated content was like a good idea at the time, but the reality is we've actually got to go, David, to your question, we've got to just go research the data that consumers around the world need. So what we did is we hired an intern, and we started going to airline websites and looking at every one of their fleet pages and their basically their fleet pages, and on those pages, in little bits and pieces, they would say what was on those planes. And so we started to, the reality, the sort of sad reality is that the intern did it all on Post-it notes. So by the end of the summer, we had about 2,000 or 3,000 Post-it notes around our office. And we're kind of looking at this and just, we're all working so hard and trying to figure everything out, and realizing we're going to have to put this into a spreadsheet and then ultimately a database, which is obviously what we did. So we built a database of subfleets of airlines around the world, subfleet by subfleet. What a subfleet is take like a 757-200, but version 1, version 2, version 3. So it's lower than even the long aircraft model. So 757-200 version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the case of an airline like United, perhaps. And then, so we built this database of subfleets, and then we started populating it with data that we could find from wherever we could find it. It was airline websites, the vendors to airlines like Wi-Fi manufacturers, seat manufacturers. we bought the OAG file and we started parsing through the OAG is the global flights, one of the global flight schedule providers. And the data file has all sorts of bits of information in it, but very few companies probably, I don't think anybody has gone as far into the OAG flight file to just understand every single piece of information in there. And there were little clues to, like how many seats were on a plane. And then by knowing that, we could figure out which version it was. And because we knew what was on each version, we then could match it to the global flight schedule. I hope this is making sense. And ultimately, basically come up with a enriched global flight schedule that had all of these amenities. That was where we started. Then, and I'll be brief on this, we expanded into a new content type. That's called amenities, what I just said. Then we decided that there needed to be even richer content. So we started thinking about how can we build a content type with photos and videos and cabin tours. And probably a little known fact, but we actually started doing banner ads that were very targeted on OTAs. And it would say, like, if you searched for London to New York, it would say Delta offers these amenities on this route. So it was all targeted to what people were searching. Airlines loved what we were doing. We were helping them solve this big differentiation problem and, moving away from commoditization to differentiation and helping them talk about the products and services they were offering. And consumers liked it because they were getting some good information. And then the airlines came back to us and said, okay, we want to do this again, but you're making it too hard for us to provide all the photos. So we had another inflection point where we said, we should not be a media company. We should go be a data company and let the Sojourns and Adaras and intent medias of the world do, travel advertising and media. So at that moment, we had this big epiphany and we started building something called the Routehappy Hub, which was like one airline-specific content management system for product attributes for flights. And so we started building that out, and then we created a new content type after amenities called UPAs, Universal Product Attributes. That's a content type that has pictures and videos and cabin tours and graphics and captions and things like that. Then, to get to the end of this, then we started thinking about fares and all of the new kinds of fares that were emerging, like basic economy, and you get a bag, you don't get a bag, you get a boarding, you get a seat assignment, you don't get a seat assignment. And we thought our system can create a content type for that, but it's territory that others we thought were really occupying, like the GDSs, Sabre Amadeus Travelport, and maybe ATPCO, which ultimately ended up buying us. And little by little, though, we got this feedback from the market that we should go down that path to create structured data on what you get or don't get by fare. And so we went down that path as well. And that one, that content type is called UTAs, Universal Ticket Attributes. So it's like the checks and X's in grids that you see on airline websites and on OTAs.
All super fascinating.
Yes.
It's funny, I remember, I don't know, it was 5 years ago when I first heard about you guys launching the company. My initial gut reaction was, this sounds like a feature, not a company. And there's no way they can start an entire company around this. Basically, do we have more legroom or not? And I think you answered the question, how it's a full company, not a feature, is incredibly complex. But serious props on being able to assemble all that data.
Wait, David, I just have to tell you, you and so many other people, VCs, my mom, like all these people said, it's a feature. Maybe Kevin back in the day, I don't know, Kevin, if you said that, but all these people said, it's a feature, not a company. What do you do? Like, it's a cute little feature. And I just kept saying, it's so complicated. There is so much to this and there's so much value to unlock. So not only did I get that feedback, but at the very beginning in 2010, I was offered a job with Agoda that I was not expecting at all. And Agoda, Priceline had just bought Agoda. They were based in Bangkok. And I loved the Agoda people. And for a little while, maybe a split second, I thought, well, maybe I'll go take the big job at Agoda, and then I'll do Routehappy as a nights and weekends project. Because all these people are saying it's a feature, not a company. Oh man, like 9 years of just climbing Mount Everest. That's what it's been like. This thing it's big because it's so complicated in the universe of airlines and sales channels and technology providers. It's all so complex and it's changing, and someone needs to just step up and take responsibility for it all. So I can attest to the fact that it's a company, not a feature.
You know, Robert, us journalists aren't really allowed to have an opinion on things. So, you know, I can't recall whether I ever said it was just a feature, not a product. I mean, interesting. You made reference there to the capital of Thailand there. I mean, that's where you were officially born as a business. I mean, most startups, I think, in our space usually say the Valley or New York or Berlin or London or something like that, or Tel Aviv or something.
Yeah.
Bangkok. I mean, give us a little kind of an overview of what it was like creating a new business base there, rather than arguably one of the more higher profile startup-friendly cities around the world.
Yes, yeah, good question. So, you know, I started a little later. I was not in my 20s or even close to that when I started this, and I will talk about Routehappy as a grown-up startup in a few minutes. But I, you know, after almost a decade with Site 59 Travelocity Sabre, I quit my job. I went to Asia for the year, and I was just, you know, going to do market research and figure out what company I wanted to start. I did decide very clearly I wanted to start a company. Wasn't even necessarily in the travel space originally, but then I got kind of smart, I think, and decided to do something in a space that I knew something about. So I'm in Bangkok. I decided that this was the idea that I wanted to do. I had been thinking about this, you know, for many of the years that I had been within Travelocity. I thought there's just this big problem that I don't get why people aren't, you know, being more anxious about this. And I thought it was a real problem. So I bought the domain name in the middle of 2010 and I was in Bangkok. I started looking for developers and designers. I got involved in the tech community there. I realized that I wasn't going to raise money there, so I started spending quite a bit of time in Singapore and started talking to venture firms, et cetera. So it really was like a Southeast Asia thing at the very beginning. But I started hiring people, and I slowly but surely realized that this idea was bigger than I even imagined and was harder, and that I needed to find people who really understood the space and where I could have access to capital the way I needed it, and that I had the, you know, the credibility behind me. So after about 6-ish months of trying in Southeast Asia, I, you know, despite the fact that I had this fantasy of living in Southeast Asia and having a really wonderful lifestyle and, you know, launching this amazing company, frankly, I got smart. I watched The Social Network the night before I left Bangkok. I was sort of shaking when I saw that movie because I just thought, this seems like a real intense journey I'm about to go on. But I got on a plane the next day. I came to New York at the end of January 2011, and that's when it really started to get serious.
Actually, Robert, it's an interesting point. Sorry for interrupting you in full flow there. Do you think, given that you said that you had been thinking about this problem when you were at Travelocity, and you were starting to understand the scale of how big the problem is, but how big the opportunity was if you solved it? Do you sense if you'd stayed at Travelocity and gained some influence within the business, you may have persuaded the powers that be at that point to have supported you to develop it within that business?
Not a chance.
Really? Because I mean, it was part of Sabre by then, and Sabre arguably could have built something like this.
Yeah, not a chance is my view now, Kevin. And the reason, I don't think, I've really had to reflect on this, because at the beginning of Routehappy, I had conversations with incredibly smart people at very large companies, and they all would have had the capital and the resources to do this. But the problem is that it's a problem that needs to be solved by the industry. And so one company cannot solve this problem It's not the core business of any one of these companies. So it wasn't core, and it wouldn't have been core enough to Travelocity or Sabre to solve this problem, for the whole industry. They might have tried to solve it for themselves. But then you get into the problem where airlines want one solution. They don't want to put their content in multiple places. So it's this, huge impediment to doing this as one company. Then on top of that, once you take responsibility for it, you can never, ever stop taking responsibility for it. So you can't have the, young whippersnapper at Travelocity who started this thing and then they leave. Like, what are you going to do? You have to have a whole team and department to keep this thing going. And then the powers that be at Travelocity or Sabre would say, well, why are we doing this on behalf of, why are we creating content that's going to, help make our competitors successful? So we're just going to keep it for ourselves. But then the airlines would say, but we don't like that because we want to put our content in one place. So it was like this inherent, once I figured that out, I think I was convinced that Routehappy had a chance of being successful because, to the earlier question of, it's just why I thought nobody else is going to touch this thing with a 10-foot pole, because it's so complicated and kind of so sort of ugly to manage all this data and bring it all together. So I did think, a lot of investors and others said, why are you dealing with the airline industry? Just do hotel, which is where the money is. And I said, that's exactly why I'm doing air, because no, I don't think I think we're going to get a huge head start and be able to accomplish this. And I know that there is a lot of value to unlock in air. I had made money in air before on the air side of the business. And I thought, let, 95% of other entrepreneurs go to hotel, and more power to them, because it's a great industry and there's lots of problems to solve there. But the airline industry needed this. So, I saw the opportunity and took it.
A quick follow-up on that. So you talked, you elaborated here, you started to elaborate on working with those airlines and what they wanted. We've spoken with Paulina from Wanderoo and Aaron from Silver Ale, and a lot of what we talked about was like, how do you solve the supply problem? How do you go about with the regional strategy, getting, in their case, bus and rail separately to play ball in ways that they previously haven't? And you said they wanted to have one source of content. And I'm curious if you could tell us more about, number one, you were a startup. And so I imagine part of the pushback was, even if it's not some kid at Travelocity who might not be there, you also could be a startup that might not be there in a year. But then how did you think about this, working with these airlines? Did you go regionally, strategically, the biggest ones? I would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Such a good question. Okay, so number one, I made the comment about Routehappy being a grown-up startup. I think I started Routehappy when I was 41 or 42, and I'll just deviate for a second and then go right back to your question. I started looking for money, and after several months, I raised a friends and family round first. But when I started raising money, I got this real intense, you're not 25. There was a time, I don't think it exists anymore. I think the industry has just grown up, like the startup ecosystem. But when we were starting Routehappy in 2011, it was very much like, if you weren't 25 and in the Valley, you just were like not worth talking to, basically. So I could get the meetings, but it was pretty tough. Like, I'd have a 28-year-old sitting on the other side of the table telling me it was a stupid idea, or they'd say it's a good idea, but airlines, there's no money in air, so you're not going to make any money, and stuff like that. And I would just basically, what I knew from being in the industry, and this ties to your question, is that I had a few gray hairs, more now, and I knew the problems very well. Like, I had been working with airlines, I'd been working with GDSs, I'd been working with sales channels. And so one of the ways to alleviate the how on earth can a startup enter an airline office and convince them that we should do this just gargantuan project is that it was a very organic, authentic, we as an industry need to solve this. And I've left a big company, so I've been in your shoes kind of thing. And this is exactly, what we're doing now today. What do you think? It was a ton of listening and adapting meetings, I would say. We'd go in, first, luckily, because I was in the industry, I was able to, get meetings. And I started wherever I possibly could. I mean, I didn't start at the right level. I started with the people that I knew from, Site 59 and Travelocity, and then they would, they would think it was interesting, and then they would introduce me to somebody, and they would introduce me to somebody, and then finally I'd kind of climb up and get to the right level. And so two specific answers to your question. One is, it was like constantly being on the road, traveling all over the world to essentially socialize the idea, ask if people thought it was a good idea, tell them what we had done and what we had accomplished, being very transparent about, kind of where we were with airlines and where we were with sales channels, essentially telling everybody, this is a chicken and egg problem. And that, if you airline X or you GDS Y or you sales channel Z want to solve this problem, then everyone has to jump in and do it, because if you all wait for the other side to do it, it's not going to happen. But clearly, you don't just say that and people jump in. You sort of have to build stuff, and then people need to find value from that and take some chances and all that. In terms of regional versus like headquarters / global, we did do a fair amount of talking to regional offices in the beginning, because they were sort of easier to get to. But then we realized that this decision was only going to be made at headquarters. And we had to find the right person or people within the airline, within the GDS, that would, actually get the problem we were trying to solve, want to solve it, want to build a relationship with us. So there was, I was on a plane. There were a bunch of us who were on planes just all the time in the beginning. And one, this is a total secret, and I can't believe I'm about to reveal it, but I'm going to.
No, please go ahead.
Okay, I know you want juicy stuff, so this is good. So I would say, in order to get meetings with people who don't know or trust you yet, when you're not established, it's really hard to get people to meet with you from like another city or another country, because if they feel the responsibility that you're going to fly all the way halfway around the world to meet with them, and then their kid gets sick and they can't be there, it's really a problem. So I realized that because I was not getting meetings that I needed. They said they love the idea, like by email or phone, but you got to talk to people in person. So I adopted a strategy of telling people I was going to be in their city, see what happened. And oh my God, it worked perfectly. If you happen to be in London on Wednesday, people will meet with you. But if you say, will you schedule a meeting with me in 2 weeks? They'll say no. So
very interesting.
That's the tip of the century.
Yeah.
I don't get in trouble.
I wanted to quickly follow up there. So, I mean, you mentioned something, no money in air, which obviously is something that everyone in the industry has heard of, in that they don't really pay commissions for anyone who's new. But we had an interesting interview with Aaron from Silver Rail, and he was talking about how pretty much many of the rail guys don't pay for any distribution either. And you could say that, quote unquote, there's no money in rail, but they focused on rail IT, and that was a different budget internally.
Yeah.
I feel like maybe I'm interpreting this wrong, but that's why I wanted to clarify. Like, is basically what you're saying is, there is money in air. These guys are willing to pay. They're not willing to pay for distribution to the OTAs, which is traditionally how people think about it. They are willing to pay for other services in IT, and you are more in that budget. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's an element of what I was saying, but what I really mean is that this is a major market. This is one of the largest segments of commerce is travel. I think that travel may be the biggest, and then air is the biggest, and I think in terms of the actual revenue side of it. So it's that what my thesis was that there was value to be unlocked, and if you could help unlock value, and what I mean by that is flight shopping was always really commoditized. It was like became a race to the bottom. It's all about price, and then OTAs came and made it more about price because it was transparent, shopping, and there's a good side to that from a consumer side in particular, but the reality is it then caused airlines to they didn't have the tools to be able to differentiate effectively and to tell consumers about why you'd pick my airline versus the next. LCCs, when they came in, they contributed very much to that race to the bottom. And so it's that if you can figure out how to help airlines and their sales channels actually create value, then there's willingness to pay, to your point. So it's, willingness to pay for IT services, willingness to pay for content that improves conversion, improves upsell, improves customer satisfaction. And so I had experiences in my career before Routehappy that caused me to see there's actually, there's money here to be made, but it's also, there's value to be created. And so the big idea of Routehappy was, if we can grow the pie for the whole industry, and it's like a total win-win-win, because airlines get a platform and data to be able to sell their differentiators. Travel channels, sales channels get the ability to finally have a content type to improve the shopping experience and, make it more like on Amazon rather than just, here's the flight and schedule and kind of, you do the best you can. And then consumers, who this is all ultimately for, finally have the ability to have the information they need to make the right decisions for themselves. And when you can unlock all of that, there's willingness to pay, which is what we found.
A very decent segue. I think we were talking about pay and the thorny issue of how you actually make money as a startup. I mean, how did you, given that it was a new type of product, and not only you as a business, but the service that you were providing and things like that, how did you establish a pricing structure for the people that you wanted to pay for it?
Yeah. So we thought, Kevin, that we were going to come in to work. I'm going to make up a date, like March of 2013. We thought, we're going to figure out our pricing model today. Oh, were we wrong about that? The business model turned out to be almost a decade of figuring out how is this going to work. And once I realized that, and once we realized that, we went into a different mode, which was, at any given moment, we have to have a point of view about how we should charge. And it's gone through lots of different iterations. Like, there was a moment with airlines that we were convinced it was going to be about PBs, which is passengers boarded. So that's like the easiest way to differentiate the size of an airline, which is how many passengers they board every year. So you've got the 150 million, airlines, and you've got the 20 million airlines. That's an easy way to do it. And we were just dead wrong about that. That's the way that a lot of airline software companies price their products, but airlines basically did not want that. And so it was very much a sort of, I made the comment earlier about listening and adapting. So it was very much this is the model. We recognize, very genuinely, that this is a new thing in the market, and we can't purport to say that we have all the answers yet, but we are bound and determined to solve this problem. So what do you think of the model today? Does this work for you? Does it not work for you? If it doesn't, then how could it? So we were sort of very open, in the beginning, to just having honest conversations with our prospective customers. And then, but, with the broader purpose of, we need you to help us set the business model so that Routehappy can be an ongoing concern and can keep helping you, solve these problems forever, kind of thing. So it was, I think there are parallels to other industries, but this particular one, in my view, required a level of genuineness and sort of humility about, what we're trying to solve. It also was that we would tell every airline and GDS and sales channel in the world, and anyone listening who, I've interacted with over the last 10 years will attest to this, I think, that it was very much it takes a village. We can't do this ourselves. So we will do everything we can possibly do to create the tools and the content that you need to differentiate your products and services. But we also then, we need the airlines to talk to their sales channels and say, oh, you should integrate our rich content from Routehappy.
Yeah.
We needed the sales channels to say to the airlines, will you put your rich content with Routehappy and support them so we can get the rich content? It was like this never ending, and we're still in that, and we're not done. Like it's sort of this is a 25-year endeavor, I think, to get it to, where I would consider true scale, maybe 20 years.
Yeah, tell me, it's just on that. I mean, it would be wonderful if you named some of these airlines, but did you have any at the beginning who just kind of rubbed their chins and scowled a little bit and said, we just can't see the value in this, who then perhaps a few years down the line with their tails wagging between their legs sorrowfully said, yeah, okay, we need to have this?
Oh, that was such a good question. Okay.
It'd be wonderful,
yes.
as I said, if you named one or two.
Yeah. Okay. Let me see what I feel comfortable doing. I know you want good content.
We want heads. Make heads roll.
So, I mean, everybody's great in this industry, and I'm not dissing anyone. We had some earlier adopters that were sort of very engaged with us, early on, and helped us shape and form this. And I'd say United and Qantas were in that camp. Then we had some maybe middle kind of, sort of a little bit curious what we're doing. I'd say probably American is in that camp, and maybe ANA. And then there were ones that so nobody, to your question, Kevin, no one, I think nobody said this is a terrible idea. Other than, investors and some family members and people who didn't get it. But from the industry side, it was like, oh, this is a terrific idea, but you're not going to be able to, if anything, it was, you're not going to be able to pull it off. But there were airlines, I'd say, Delta came a little bit later. We were fully engaged with them, but there are thoughts along the way about, we can do things ourselves. And I think Air France was in this, Air France KLM was in this camp a little bit. We can do these things by ourselves. We're not sure we need you, but we want to keep in touch on these things. And we were very philosophical about this. We just said, the reality is that airlines and sales channels and GDSs have to do this when they're ready. We can't force this issue. We got to do the best work we can possibly do. I'll do on the GDS side. Sabre has been with us, very actively for years, and Amadeus has been more in toe dip mode. Things are changing across the board, though. At this point, we can talk about, Routehappy under ATPCO. But there definitely has been an evolution, and companies sort of recognizing that they either wanted to, be an early adopter, or they sort of maybe tried some things themselves and then eventually came back and said, well, we think we can, we think actually we do need you and we're going to plug you in here. So, we've been friends with everybody from the beginning, I would say. Let's put it that way. Nobody who ever said we don't need you, we were never mad at them or mean to them. We just said, okay, take your time. We're never going to go away. We're going to keep bugging you. So as long as you take our calls and our emails, we'll just be here and we'll do this for you.
So by process of elimination, those that aren't customers now are those that perhaps have dug their heels in.
I think my prediction, nobody has a perfect crystal ball. I think it's just a matter of time. I think we're doing an industry utility function that the entire industry needs. And little by little, we keep making our products and content and services better. And then airlines are also, airlines and sales channels are maturing. So there's also an element of, in any given market, there's going to be companies that are sort of, leaders on ideas, and there's going to be ones that, do it in the next phase, and there are ones that do it later. And so I just think it's a matter of an entire industry transforming, and everybody sort of eventually has to get there. Now, that isn't to say that, every single sales channel and airline in the world will work with Routehappy and ATPCO on rich content, but I kind of think it's going to be pretty close, is my prediction. We've played our cards right. We've priced right. We we've built the right products. We're solving a utility problem for the whole industry. So you'll see a lot more announcements coming out.
You've mentioned ATP code now a couple of times, and I want to segue the conversation into how you've managed that transition. First of all, I think it would be great if you could kind of start with an explanation of who is ATP Co. But I also think that, if I was your investor and you told me that they were your most likely buyer, someone who had never acquired a tech company before, I would have definitely raised an eyebrow. But I know me and you spoke about this about 8 months ago about how you were able to build that relationship over time, and so again, just, start with an explanation maybe of who they are, but it would also be great to understand how you built the relationship and how you got them to make their first ever acquisition.
Yeah. So, okay, ATPCO stands for the Airline Tariff Publishing Company. People in revenue management at airlines, and some people in the GDS and sales channels would know them. It's essentially an airline-owned utility where most airlines of the world file their airfares and their fare-related data like fare rules. There's many other things that ATPCO does. I didn't know the half of it before they acquired us, and I really started getting involved in ATPCO. But imagine just this one industry utility that airlines around the world created 53 years ago. Essentially, there's a little more to it. Where all of the airfare of the world is stored, and the fare rules, and then the GDSs and some large sales channels pull this raw data directly from ATPCO, and from which they construct fares and itineraries that we all shop for as consumers. So to me, several years ago, we started getting questions from everybody. What's your relationship with ATPCO? Are you doing this with ATPCO? Because we were called originally by many people the ATPCO, like we'd explain what we're doing and they'd say, oh, this is like the ATPCO of rich content. And we were both flattered by that because it meant that they sort of got it, like one single place for an airline to store all of their rich content to then disseminate to any and all of their sales channels, direct and indirect and all that. And it also scared us because we thought, how on earth is this startup going to turn ourselves into an industry-owned utility? Like that leap seemed very, very hard, far away and daunting. Also, ATPCO it's like, I initially thought it was like the IRS of the industry, Internal Revenue Service, for those who are not familiar with that term. But it's a bit of that, but it's also like the MIT of the airline industry. Like, it's people who have been in the industry for years and years and understand just the most complex and unsexy problems. And I had always thought that Routehappy was quite an unsexy business solving a really hard problem. ATPCO, is certainly in that category. So we're sort of scared of them, but kind of intrigued by them. So several years ago, I decided we have had enough questions about ATPCO that we have to go investigate. So I asked someone on my team to go look into it, and they did a kind of a report on ATPCO, and it was just so daunting and so complicated that we kind of said, well, we can't deal with this right now. Like, we don't even know where we'd start. Then, when something is meant to be, my view is that it comes back. Like, things come back and you have to deal with them. So maybe a couple of years later, it came back again. And then I started to take it seriously myself, and I started to reach out to ATPCO, saying, I really think we should talk. Now, quite a bit of hubris I'm still just at this point, an entrepreneur trying to do something sort of too big for a startup, frankly, in some sense. But we had enough traction with airlines. Google, Expedia were our customers, and I think at that point, United American, ANA, Qantas, we had a number of big Sabre, a number of big customers at that point. And so I had a 1-hour call with a marketing person at ATPCO. and I was trying to explain what we do, or I explained what we do. The call went very well, and she said, "I want to introduce you to some other people," and I was just, elated, because in this industry, as you guys know, in this industry, just getting a meeting with one of these companies is half the battle. Like, I earlier on in Routehappy's history, when I'd say, "I got a meeting with American Airlines, isn't that great? And it's only taken me 6 months, and the meeting is happening in 2 months. Look at us." My board would look at me like, "You have got to be kidding." That, the ones who didn't know the travel industry, the people on the board who knew the travel industry, rock on, Bob, like, this is incredible. And then the other ones who didn't know the industry were just like, "You've got to be kidding. It takes you 8 months to get a meeting with one of these companies." So we had a series, we ended up having follow-up meetings. A funny story here is that, again, this is another one of these little secret things. I knew that I had to get an in-person meeting with ATPCO, because if I did another call that went more into detail on the phone, I just thought, I'm going to lose them. Like, it's too complicated. We have really, like, earnestly gone in and built stuff that the industry needs, but ATPCO won't understand that just by a phone call. And so I need to beg them basically to meet me in person. So, funny story is, they told me they wanted another phone call, and I don't know what possessed me to do this, but I did it. I said, "I have to come see you in person." And they said, "No, we don't want to do that. We only want to do a phone call." And I said, "Well, then I'll wait until you're ready to meet me in person." I kind of couldn't believe that I was doing it, because, as a startup, you sort of have to put yourself out there, and you take meetings whenever you can get them.
Yeah.
They finally, I think 3 months later, they said, "Okay, we'll meet you in person." And I said, "Great." And we ended up having just a fantastic 3-hour meeting. I think we both were surprised by how many connection points there were, and sort of laughed a little bit about the hubris of, not taking the phone meeting. But sometimes you gotta do what your gut says, or maybe most of the time, actually.
It's just on that, Rob. I mean, you said you realised how many things you had in common, and it was an obvious relationship that needed to happen almost. But you were ATPCO's first acquisition. You're a still fairly young startup, where I'm assuming a startup culture almost.
Yeah.
How did you go about kind of thinking about integrating the two cultures of the two businesses, given that they arguably are perhaps rather different?
Yeah. So to David's question earlier, when I brought up that we were talking to ATPCO and getting more and more serious with them, ATPCO's been on a path to reinvent itself with dynamic pricing and
That's true.
NDC and retailing, which we knew they had started to toe dip themselves. David, to your comment, yes, the board said, "Don't touch this thing with a 10-foot pole." Like, no way that an industry utility owned by airlines, has never done an acquisition in 53 years, is going to acquire this company. Focus on the commercial entities. So that was definitely there, and I had to kind of stand up to the board and say, "No, I really think there's something here. We're going to keep talking to them, because even if it ends up just being a commercial relationship, there's definitely something here." And then, Kevin, to yours, it was kind of like, it was like sort of a magical thing was happening when we started to meet with them. It was almost like a parent-child thing, where we were doing the same thing that they were doing. It was a different domain. Theirs was pricing, fares and fare-related data, and starting to develop, new modern aspects of those things. And we were doing all of this rich content. If you think about the problem of flight shopping, it's these two things need to go together. So it's pricing and, what an airline offers in their products and services, and how, the amenities and what you get and don't get, and the pictures and all that. You put them together and you actually have the full story. So completely different companies, you're right. Like, we were, 100% on Google Apps, and, unlimited vacation, and just the, all of the modern things in startups. And ATPCO is an established, large-ish entity, so very, very different. But there was this common purpose that was so strong. And we'd say like, well, we built a tool like the UPA hub that has all these content restrictions because airlines have been telling us they need to have on-off switches by channel because that's, it's their content and they want to decide where to distribute it. And ATPCO would say, well, that's exactly how it works with, fares. We have the same exact thing. So completely unbeknownst to both of us, because we both were trying to solving the same, a similar problem, like two sides of the same coin, we realized that we understood each other, and we were kind of two peas in a pod, other than maybe cultural stuff. So when we ultimately came together, we realized substantively this marriage makes all the sense in the world. We get each other, we speak each other's same language, even though, neither of us knew that going into it, and kind of almost found it a little hard to believe. I remember the first ATPCO meeting. There's a wonderful woman at ATPCO who will, if she ever listens to this, will know who I'm talking about. She was looking at me like with the most skeptical eyes I think anybody has ever looked at me with for 3 hours. And, after we got through that meeting, I saw her, a month later, and I said, I was so scared of you in that meeting. And she said, I didn't know what to make of you. Like, I didn't know, could I believe you and trust you because you were saying all the right things? And just, it was sort of, I think, a meant to be thing. But what we realized when we came together is that what made sense here, ATPCO trying to modernize and enter the next generation of flight shopping, support the whole industry with all the new stuff that the industry needs, and Routehappy having solved and on its way to solving a lot of the some of the modern differentiation and flight shopping problems, and that we could put these two things together and get the best of both worlds. So we've got how do you actually create a globally recognized, standardized content type for the entire global flight shopping ecosystem? I mean, Routehappy could not do that on its own. We got part of the way, but there's all sorts of things at ATPCO, like working groups and milestones and data application, which is the official sanctioned way that that GDS is integrate the data, and sales channels integrate the data with the Routehappy modern culture and processes, et cetera. And so I don't know if everyone would know this, but I have become EVP of retailing at ATPCO to integrate Routehappy and infuse retailing into the DNA of ATPCO. Routehappy's head of chief commercial officer has become ATPCO's chief commercial officer. Routehappy's head of product has become ATPCO's head of product. Our head of corporate communications has become ATPCO's head of corporate communications. So we've sort of put the best of these worlds together, and Routehappy benefits in so many ways by understanding how does the industry really do this at scale, forever kind of thing, in a proper way where you have all the checks and balances and standards and things like that. And then ATPCO benefits from all this new blood that has come in and new ideas and kind of, some new ways of doing things that they weren't accustomed to. So it's been fascinating and good. We're modern we're building a new ATPCO.
Okay, I've got a quick one. We're going to have to wrap up because we're conscious of everyone's time. And you might just tell me to shut up and go away, Robert, but tell me, if ATPCO hadn't bought you, who do you think would have?
Oh, well,
it's the wrap-up question.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, we would have gone public for, $10 billion IPO. No, I don't think we would have gone public. We definitely would have been acquired. So I really can't say, but I think the listeners out there can kind of there was quite a bit of interest, and we did have multiple offers, and it was the kinds of companies that you can imagine, all great. And I think we could have had a great future with them, but I have to say the right thing happened, because
you have to say the right thing happened.
but I have to say, but it really did, because there's only one ATPCO and there's only one Routehappy, and everybody, it's a weird position to be in, I have to say. Like, we like everybody. We're friends with everybody. And we serve every airline, every sales channel, every technology provider. So it's kind of, the best outcome happened for the industry and certainly for Routehappy.
I'm in tears here. I'm in tears. I really am. David,
I'm sure you are.
Cool. Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Robert. Kevin and I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. And I think that is a wrap for today. This has been How I Got Here, your stories of travel and transportation innovation. Thank you very much, and see you next time.
Thank you.
No problem. Thanks a lot, Robert. Talk to you.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to How I Got Here podcast. We'll be back next week with more insight stories behind startups and innovation in travel and transportation. Check mozio.com/move for a complete write-up of the highlights of every podcast with translations into 5 languages, and get your daily dose of news on the digital travel economy by subscribing to the newsletter at PhocusWire.com. See you next week.